Previously on X-Men.
So what did the opening tell us about this movie? Well, for starters, it told us that Jean Grey is our protagonist.
It's a female-led story, there's a female protagonist.
And it told us her want and need, which most protagonists have. Jean wants to avoid hurting people again, and that will drive the plot. But what she needs is to not be so hopeless, that she needs to have hope in herself and not be afraid of her own power. That will be her character arc. Then more layers about our protagonist are revealed as the film establishes her weakness, which will be attacked by the obstacles in Act 2. Jean's weakness is the buried emotional drama that the Force is digging up. In my last video, I broke down the first act of Dark Phoenix, and this video is going to be a breakdown of the second act. Now, Act 1 had established that Jean was the film's protagonist. Simon Kinberg even said so in interviews. However, some people have argued that Jean isn't the focus of the movie, but that it's instead about the men in her life. Some even thought that Jean was a MacGuffin to set up the fight between the mutant groups, because they think that is supposed to be the main tension.
All of these characters are different people according to where the plot needs them to be at any given moment. And the person that is most deserved in the movie, who by the way was far better, I thought, in this movie, in this version of the character than in Apocalypse, is Jean Grey. Yeah. She is a MacGuffin. She is a living MacGuffin for the movie. She has actually, for a story about somebody reconciling themselves to their own power, none of it is about her own power. All of it is about her being used, or being sought after for a power that is not her own, which again, what parts of the story are organic to the story or not, that's not interesting as a film.
What are the biggest issues in Dark Phoenix for you personally? Because again, you did say it was a rotten movie, so what really stood out to you?
For me, it's just with the X-Men franchise as a whole, it's just the portrayal, of Jean Grey, of the Dark Phoenix. And, you kind of had this glimpse of hope at the end of Apocalypse where you felt as though, okay, they're going to take on this saga. They're going to do it right. But I've never seen a film about someone who was almost a supporting character.
Good point.
You don't get to learn anything about Jean. You don't really get to dive that much deeper into Jean Grey than any movie really has done, throughout this franchise. And once again, you're given stories of Raven, of Eric and Charles, and it overshadows who we're supposed to be focusing on, and that is Jean Grey.
That's an excellent point, Mon.
Excellent point.
Did you agree with that? Is that the movie's called Dark Phoenix, yet we seem to be focusing on everybody else besides Jean Grey?
I feel like the last couple of X-Men movies want to focus on whoever's so hot right now. They had Jennifer Lawrence in a contract, so they made Mystique all of a sudden this centric character when she's always, sort of been a villain on the side. And I think that's happening again here.
That's not really true. For starters, Jean has vastly more screen time than any other character in the movie. It even surpassed the screen time Wolverine got in the first 3 X-Men movies, according to estimates by an IMDb user known as 9Wheel0. This user does screen time estimates for Marvel movies as a hobby, and it's safe to say that the user's estimates on Dark Phoenix are accurate. Listen to Simon Kinberg's commentary on these deleted scenes.
And this is an extra beat that we add of Evan signing a helmet that we felt like was maybe one step too far in terms of their level of celebrity. Just little things like that felt like also we just wanted to get to Jean. We really wanted to focus on the fact that she had been transformed, and this is the story we were telling.
Terribly sorry, everyone, but I'm going to have to leave. Thank you very, very much.
We're taking away from Jean. Like, if you look, this is a perfectly fine scene. It's got Jennifer in it. It's got Dazzler and a sling. It's got a cute line from Quicksilver.
Charles.
A nice moment between Hank and Charles, but you really want to get to Jean, because the question is, what has happened to Jean? And so we just cut in much more radically so we cut all this. This is a scene I miss a little bit just because I think it's a strong scene for Scott. But again, it was a scene, if you notice, almost all these scenes are scenes without Jean in them. And so any of these deleted scenes, while they may be good scenes, you're losing Jean.
Charles.
This is once again a transition scene where we felt like in the movie where we wanted to be like hurtling forward and focused on Jean.
Not in class.
He is really trying to avoid making the same mistake as The Last Stand did, which was pushing Jean to the side because of her gender. Secondly, movies are essentially about their protagonists wanting something and having trouble getting what they want due to there being obstacles in their way. And by the end of this journey, the main character or characters are different because of this experience. They either have a moral transformation or an increase in wisdom. That is basically the point in storytelling. Because one of the most fundamental human principles is that human beings have the capability to change. This is what a character arc is. Now, if you recall, Act 1 had showed us that Jean's mental drama has caused her to have serious anger management issues, and she wants to avoid losing control of her temper so she wouldn't hurt people. Now in Act 2, Jean faces a series of increasingly difficult obstacles in the way of achieving that goal, and her character does change as a result of this experience. She becomes the Dark Phoenix. That's her character arc, which is the main thesis of my video essays. And the thesis of this video is that Jean has all the essential elements of a protagonist. So let's begin this breakdown of Act 2. Now, this is the part of a story that deals with those obstacles that I talked about, and the stakes raised for the protagonist throughout this act, known as the rising action, with each move they make entrapping them even more. Now, here's another similarity that Jean shares with Bruce Banner. They both try to control their anger, but someone or something is always pushing their buttons.
Answer the question, Jean.
Stop, Eric, you're making me angry.
Good. I want you to be angry. Show me what happens,
I don't want to hurt you.
What happens when you're angry? Show me what happens.
Throughout Act 2, Jean's drama grows progressively worse, and she becomes more and more aggressive as a result. That makes it more difficult for her to keep herself from harming people. That is an example of a rising action.
When someone first contacted me about this film, we were talking about making a film about a girl unraveling psychologically as the film went on.
It mirrors how Jean developed a wilder and less under control personality after she became Phoenix in the comic. A personality that slowly grew and consumed Jean until she eventually became the Dark Phoenix. Now let's dive into the third sequence. This is where the protagonist faces the first obstacle and the stakes begin to raise. Often there is some exposition that is brought out here. This sequence is based on elements from Uncanny X-Men issue 136. In this issue, Jean had visited her family after she destroyed a planet. She reads their minds and finds out that deep down, they are afraid of her because she is a mutant. And naturally, Jean is upset by this. She becomes offended, to the point where she becomes hostile towards her family by destroying objects with her power. Jean's father responds to her behavior, thinking that she is not his daughter, and rejects her. The X-Men then show up, and a fight between them and Jean ensues. So in this sequence, Jean goes to the Grey House to see her family like her comic book counterpart. And as I mentioned earlier, we get some exposition here. We learn that Jean's father had abandoned her because he is afraid of her.
I can't handle her. I don't even know what she is.
I do.
Then you'll take her. I'm sorry, Jean. But my whole world died that day. You went with it.
Now this is clearly supposed to be an extreme version of Jean's father rejecting her, as well as the movie's version of her family being afraid of her. Except in this version, Jean's father actually acted on his fear. We also see a version of Jean acting hostile towards this.
You didn't even say goodbye.
I didn't get a chance to say goodbye to your mother.
I was 8 years old. How could you do that to me?
And this abandonment element was likely added to create another parallel between Jean and Charles. Both of them were abandoned by the people they loved.
You abandoned me! You took her away and you abandoned me!
Then Jean's memory of the car accident fully returned to her, and she finds out that she caused it, which devastates her. Knowing that she caused her mother's death and her father had abandoned her for it has made Jean's drama even worse. And we see her become more aggressive as a result, shown by her crushing these cars as if they hit a brick wall.
Stay away from me!
That's an example of the stakes being raised and an homage to Uncanny X-Men issue 131, where she destroyed a car in a similar manner. And we get more references to issue 136 in this sequence, like Jean confronting the X-Men in front of the Grey House, blaming Charles for setting these events in motion.
You shouldn't have come here.
Why is that? We've only come to bring you home, Jean.
I don't have a home. You made sure of that.
And this exchange reveals that Jean did not like going on dangerous missions for Charles, which was foreshadowed back in Act 1. And like Mystique, she believes that Charles was using the X-Men for fame.
You told me my father was dead, and you used me for my powers.
No, that's just not true. That's not what happened.
The issue also had Cyclops begging Jean to come back, and we see an adaptation of that here.
We'll figure everything out together. Just come back to me. Remember, you said you'd always come back to me. Come back to me.
Jean also fights the X-Men in this sequence, just like in the issue. And that serves as her very first obstacle. But the difference between this version and the comic version is that the original had Jean wanting to fight them, because she was the Dark Phoenix at that point. Here, she just wants to be left alone, and the X-Men are the aggressors.
Jean was never the villain. I was.
Jean manages to overcome this obstacle, and we enter sequence 4. This is where the first combination happens, aka the midpoint climax. This is where the protagonist faces an even higher obstacle after recovering from the first obstacle. And they either have a major success or a major failure. Jean may be able to beat the X-Men, but in this movie, she is her own worst enemy, as her emotional drama causes her telepathy to go out of control again, which serves as the obstacle of this sequence, and Jean tries really hard to keep herself from lashing out again. But to no avail, as Jean loses her temper the moment Mystique touches her, and she lashes out, resulting in her accidentally killing Mystique. So that's definitely a major failure at the midpoint climax.
I felt like killing this particular character in the middle of the film.
We get a funeral scene, which is an homage to Uncanny X-Men issue 138. Except the funeral was for Jean in the comic instead of Mystique. Now on to the 5th sequence, which heavily deals with a subplot that was set up earlier to prevent second act slag. And here, the protagonist tries another method to achieve their goal. Basically, they stop being reactive and become proactive as a result of the midpoint climax. As I established in my last video, Act 1 had set up a subplot with Mystique asking Beast to leave the X-Men with her. And we come back to that in this sequence, with Hank now thinking that she might have been onto something. That Professor X is a jerk.
You know what? I know what I did wrong, okay, Charles? She was gonna leave. Raven was gonna leave, and I talked her out of it. She saw what the rest of us didn't.
What was that?
This whole time, we've been trying to protect these kids from the world when really we should have been protecting them from you.
Meanwhile, Jean acts like most protagonists do after the midpoint climax. She stops being reactive and becomes proactive by trying to control the pain and anger inside her instead of just running away like she's been doing. And she does this by seeking answers from someone who was once consumed by pain and anger. I'm of course talking about Magneto. Like Jean, he lost his mother when he was a child, and that has filled him with rage.
You hurt people. How did you stop?
Ever since I was a child, I lost everyone I ever loved. So I hurt people. Killed whatever I thought would make the pain go away. It didn't. Listen to me very carefully, my friend. Killing sure will not bring you peace. So I stopped.
How to stop.
But instead, Magneto pushes her buttons like an idiot, and that triggers her PTSD. And her mental condition has gotten even worse with the death of Mystique. We see that with Jean having a psychotic episode that involves her hallucinating the last words that Raven said to her.
I'm not giving this on you, Jean. This is what family does. We take care of each other. You're my family, Jean.
Would you mind if I came to your home unannounced and uninvited?
Jean's anger management issues are also far worse than they ever were before. When soldiers try to arrest her, she directs all her rage at them and nearly kills them. Magneto steps in, and him and Jean have a sort of clash over the soldiers' lives, and Eric manages to save them. Now, Phoenix and Magneto did clash in Uncanny X-Men issue 112 and 113, which is one of the contributing factors that led to Jean becoming the Dark Phoenix that often gets overlooked, which I'll dive into in the next sequence. Anyway, movie Jean snaps out of her rage blackout and Magneto casts her out, which leaves her hopeless. Later on, Hank shows up to tell Eric about what happened to Mystique, and they both team up to take down Jean. So that is a subplot, not the main plot like a lot of people believe. It is just there to prevent second act slag and to expand on the central theme like subplots do. And as I showed in my last video, the central theme of this movie is about control. This is a movie about someone who can't stop hurting people due to her uncontrollable rage. And so we get a subplot about someone who can't stop hurting people due to his uncontrollable rage. It relates to the character's emotions in regards to the main tension, as subplots regularly do. Okay, now it's time for the sixth sequence, where the greatest obstacle is faced. Here the second act tension is at its highest, and we arrive at another plot point called the main combination, which is what the movie has been building up to. It will end Act 2 and create the tension of Act 3. Main characters face their last alternative here, and we also see them at their lowest. And the main combination changes the lead character in some way. Basically, their character arc is completed. Jean's clash with Magneto in Uncanny X-Men issue 113 results in her accidentally causing the death of the X-Men. Or so she thought. I'm not going to go into details about how they survived. Anyway, Jean became grief-stricken, and Charles did not give her the help and support she needed, so she left the mansion. And this is where the Hellfire Club made their move. Mastermind takes advantage of the situation by filling the emotional void within Jean in order to make her instinctively trust them. That trust eventually became love, and with that, Mastermind was able to mold Jean into becoming the Black Queen. Now, Classic X-Men issue 24 delves deeper into this, showing how Mastermind had gained Jean's trust and what was going on in her head. Jean's psyche is shown to be very fragile here, blaming herself for the death of Cyclops and the rest of the X-Men, which is a very common emotional reaction to a dramatic event. And the quote-unquote death of the X-Men was pretty dramatic for her, to say the least. Mastermind comforts Jean, comparing her power to that of a god, and telling her that she should live like one, leading her down the path to becoming the Black Queen and eventually the Dark Phoenix.
And if you stop fighting that force inside you, if you embrace it, you will possess the very power of a god.
The movie is based around all of this with elements of Jean's origin story. Jean accidentally causing the death of someone she loves along with a teammate, her psyche being fragile,
Mine of a psychic is a fragile thing.
Charles not giving the help and support she needed in her time of grief, and now we get an adaptation of Jean's low point in this sequence. which makes sense since protagonists are supposed to be at their lowest here. Jean tries to drink her sorrows away at a bar, and the Hellfire Club finally make their move, with Emma Frost taking advantage of the situation and trying to gain her trust. The first sign of Jean being at her lowest is her saying that she doesn't know who she is, referring to how her personality changes from Jean Grey to Phoenix like her comic book counterpart.
I don't know who I am.
Also like her comic book counterpart, Jean blames herself for the death of her loved ones, to the point where she believes that her father was right to abandon her.
You're the girl who everyone abandons.
Maybe they had good reason.
This is definitely supposed to be the low point for our protagonist, and this parallels Jean's self-loathing at the beginning of the movie, which is intentional according to the filmmakers. And Emma's interaction with Jean parallels Jean's interaction with Charles. Like him, she tells Jean that she is special.
You see, I have a school that is for young people who are like you, special.
Because you're special, Jean.
Telling Jean that there is nothing wrong with her.
No, because you are not broken.
You're afraid of it because you think it makes you bad, evil. All the words you've been taught to keep you in line.
Offering Jean help to control her power.
I can help you. I can help you so that you never have to break things ever again.
With my help, you could control what's inside you.
Charles was able to gain Jean's trust with those words, and Emma does as well, using those same words.
I told you they could never understand you. And what they don't understand, they fear. And what they fear, they seek to destroy.
And Emma is able to convince Jean that Xavier is the enemy.
Have you come to kill me too?
Never.
Like when Mastermind tricked Jean into thinking the X-Men were her enemies in the comic version, which resulted in her assaulting her allies, and we see the same thing happen here. This highlights Jean's character flaw of being impressionable, and it's worse now with her mind being so unhinged. Emma is supposed to be Jean's highest obstacle, of course. She has gone from being controlled by Xavier to being controlled by her. She's simply being what others want her to be, like the intro of the movie said. So Jean is about to obliterate Professor X, much like she did in X-Men The Last Stand. So the second act tension is definitely at its highest here. However, Jean was not the protagonist in The Last Stand like she is in this movie. Protagonists often get out of the low point by getting a prep talk from someone who is close to them, and they help the protagonist get back up on their feet. Here is a very famous example from Batman Begins.
I wanted to save Gotham. I failed.
Why do we force? So that we can learn to pick ourselves up.
You still haven't given up on me.
Never.
Professor X also had a low point himself in Days of Future Past, which he had gotten out of in a similar manner as Bruce did. He got an inspirational prep talk from his older self about having hope.
I can't do this. My mind.
Yes, you can.
It won't take it.
Just a little rusty.
You don't understand. It's not a question of being rusty. I can flip the switches. I can turn the knobs. But my power comes from here. It comes from... And it's broken. I feel like one of my students. Helpless.
Please, Charles, we need you to hope again.
That is another thing that Jean has in common with Charles. Thinking that she is broken and getting an inspirational prep talk about having hope. She reads Charles's mind and finds out that while he was being a control freak, everything he did was out of selfless reasons. He wasn't using the X-Men for fame like she and Mystique thought. And despite her being the cause of Mystique's death, Charles does not want to kill Jean like she thought. And he knew Raven since they were both children. The movie even reminds the audience that she was his foster sister.
She was just this little girl. She broke in looking for food. I said she could stay and that she'd never have to go hungry again. And then I think I promised her a better life.
I really hope you feel better, Hank. I hope that railing on me 5 minutes after I put my foster sister in the grave.
Charles is being the polar opposite of Jean's biological father, who abandoned her after she took away someone he loved by accident. He thinks that she is a lost cause and can't be helped. But her adoptive father, Charles, still believes in her even after she took away someone he loved. He still has hope.
I can help her in ways that you can't. She can't be helped. She's a lost cause.
As long as there's someone to care for her who believes, then there's still hope. There's still hope.
And Jean comes to her senses. And this is the main combination, what the movie has been building up to. So to say that the movie focuses on other characters and that Jean is a plot device is far from the truth. She is without question the protagonist and is written exactly as such. If any case, it's the first class characters who are the plot devices. As I've shown in this breakdown, they are simply used to advance Jean's character arc. That or expand on the film's themes. I think the reason why some people think otherwise is yet another case of cognitive bias. This time selective perception. This is when people unconsciously ignore or forget information that goes against their pre-existing beliefs or expectations. And many people had the expectation that Jean was not the star of the film long before it came out, as you can see here. But when looking at the film objectively, you'll find that Jean is the star without question. So that is it for this breakdown of Act 2. Stay tuned for my next video, which breaks down Act 3. Till next time.